It is for me a very relevant occasion to be here addressing this audience in a country that has one of our most relevant chapters in the movement. I've been traveling since I was elected a year and a half around the world, visiting our chapters and taking part in several events of corruption. And I can tell you that even though we have achieved as an international movement, we are a coalition that is present in more than 114 countries around the world. We were established in 1993 and we are celebrating 23 years of existence now. The assessment we have made is that even though we have achieved several goals in the struggle against corruption, we have put the issue of corruption in the international agenda. We have played a key role in the establishment of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, the Inter-American Convention Against Corruption, the Asian, the African Conventions, the OECD Convention Against Transnational Bribery, the anti-corruption agenda of the G20, the G8, the World Bank, and others. The conclusion is that still there is too much corruption out there. We don't know if there is more corruption than 23 years ago. But what we do know is that the corruption we are seeing now is of a different quality. That's why it is a challenge for Transparency International in these days to deal with what we now call grand corruption. Just to know a little bit about our coalition, this is an international movement that is organized through chapters. As I said, we have chapters in 114 countries, like the one we have here, TTTI. And then we have a group of individual members, distinguished people from around the world who have been committed in the struggle against corruption. Probably, and this is a map of the chapters around the world, you will see that in the Americas, we have 60 chapters already established, and we are keen to see if we can open some additional chapters in the Caribbean. Probably the most well-known product we deliver to the world is the CPI, the Corruption Perception Index. And this is a ranking, as Derek said, where we put the picture of the countries from 0 to 100, where 0 is no corruption and 100 is very clean and 0 is a lot of corruption. And you'll see the map of the world. 0 is yellow. So you'll see that there are very few countries that have low levels of corruption, while red, orange are countries with significant levels of corruption. As Derek said, Trinidad is in the position with 39 points out of 100. That is under 50. So it is not a good picture regarding the world and the situation of the countries linked to corruption and grand corruption. This is the average of the different regions, and you will see that the average of the Americas is 40. We are 10 points under 50. That means that we have not passed even the medium average of a clean country or a clean region. And as I said, Trinidad is near the average of the Americas. The Americas, of course, is not the best example. You will see that the best countries performing in the struggle against corruption, integrity, openness, and clean environment are the Nordics, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and others. Why is corruption so important? Why do we have to put in place a coalition of people and groups struggling against corruption? Why are we holding this conference now? Why is this issue a topic that usually comes at the international fora nowadays very frequently? Because there's a relation between corruption and development, because this is not only a moral issue. Corruption deepens poverty, corruption denies health, education, a clean environment. Corruption kills. There are many examples we can put of how direct killings or death of people are related to corruption. And these are some numbers that I'm bringing now as an example. This is a comparison between those countries where paying bribes is a common practice and the relation this environment of corruption has with some relevant issues of these countries. For example, you'll see in the red block, these are countries with high levels of bribing. And you will see that in those countries, the level of poverty raises significantly. Countries that pay low bribes or don't pay bribes on the yellow line have 8% average of poverty, while countries where bribing is a common practice rise up to 38. And we can see all the other indicators related to education, women dying in case of childbirth, people without access to sanitation and health, and you will see always that there's a direct relation between corruption and social impact. These are some of the numbers that explain how much money would be needed to solve some of the relevant problems of the world. In order to eradicate extreme poverty, we would need $65 billion per year. In order to grant universal health care, we would need $80 billion to solve this problem. To have access to water and sanitation around the world, $27 billion. To solve the issues of primary education, we would need $42 billion. On the other hand, if we look at the numbers of the money that's going to the private gain of the corrupt, you will see that they largely exceed the money we need to solve the social problems of the world. Illicit financial flows totalize $1 trillion per year. Bribes paid globally are more than $1 trillion. 540 billion stolen assets have been taken from developing countries. If we put all this money together, be sure that we would be able to solve most of the biggest social problems we have in the world. Some weeks ago, the president of the World Bank went to Peru. As you may have noticed, I'm not German, I'm Peruvian. And I was elected as the first chair of Transparency International coming from a developing country. So I was saying that the president of the World Bank went to Peru for the annual meetings of the World Bank and the IMF. And in his speech, he mentioned something that really shocked me. 86 persons, not 8,600, not 86,000, not 86 million, only 86 persons in the world have the same wealth that 3,500 million people on the other extreme of poverty in this world. So something wrong is happening here. Something wrong is happening that we have that map full of reds and not of yellow. And this has to do essentially with corruption and what we now in Transparency International call grant corruption. Because the phenomenon of corruption we are seeing nowadays is totally different from the one that we had to confront when Transparency International was established 23 years ago. Now, when we talk about grant corruption, we are talking about actors that have considerable power, political or economical power, that are moving billions of dollars and whose corrupt practices are having a direct impact in human rights, basically in countries like Trinidad and Tobago, my country, and other countries with different levels of poverty underdeveloped countries. And we have many examples of what grand corruption is bringing to the world in these days. Some years ago, 2 years ago, we saw some figures that leaked. They were called the China leaks. And we observed that $150 billion were taken out of China to the Bahamas, to personal accounts. 20 of those personal accounts belong to members of parliament of China. And they, only 20, had $62.2 billion taken out from their country for their personal wealth, the personal gain. President Obiang of Equatorial Guinea, he has a son that's called Teodorin, who's just bought, his last toy was a yacht of 300 million euros with special pools to put alive the sharks he likes to fish around the world. Equatorial Guinea, like this country, has a lot of petroleum. The per capita of Equatorial Guinea citizens should be over $27 per day, and they live with less than 0.7. Where is that money going? To the pockets of the president and his family. And we can spend hours here talking about the stories of the Obiang family. Some country near Panama, former President Martinelli, currently in Miami, he fled the country taking $6,000 million. And nothing happened. If we talk about the banks and the financial sector, the HSBC, First World Bank, huge bank, has been fined with $6 billion because they were caught laundering $800 billion to the drug cartels of Mexico. BNP Paribas, French bank, very relevant bank in France, has been fined with $9 billion because they were caught laundering money to the terrorist groups in the Middle East, those who went to Paris and put the bombs and killed the people. So this is not only an issue about poverty and development and governments. This is also an issue of international security. And this is what grand corruption is doing to the world. Former President Yanukovych of Ukraine, he was not only a dictator and a killer, but he ran out of Ukraine and is now hidden in Russia with, of course, the allowance of Putin, and he took $12,000 million from the Ukraine people. Last October, I went to Malaysia to inaugurate our international conference against corruption. Every 2 years, Transparency International have this conference around the world. The day I arrived to Kuala Lumpur, I bought a newspaper and I found that the Prime Minister of Malaysia was caught with $700 million in his personal account. When I asked in public in the conference, at the end he decided not to go to inaugurate the conference. I can understand why. When I publicly asked him and his government where this $700 million came, he responded the day after in the newspaper saying he will not respond. He will not say. That this was a personal gift he had received from an Arab sheikh whose name he will not disclose. Some weeks later, the Swiss discovered that this money came from a public fund of the public of Malaysia, of the people of Malaysia. What can a single man do with $700 million? Of course, we can imagine what we can do with $700 million. One of the responses of why this money was taken was because the wife of the prime minister was going in a shopping spree. She was quite interested in go shopping. And I said, is there anything wrong in going shopping, in buying yachts, luxury houses, airplanes, any toys you want to buy? No. But go and work and buy those with the money you earn with your work. Don't take the money of the people. Can you imagine what could have been done with $700 million in order to alleviate poverty in Malaysia? Of course, this is not on the mind of the Prime Minister Rajiv, who at this point is now under investigation in Switzerland and will not respond where did he took that money from. So these are several cases. The list is very long, very, very long. And I will mention at the end, the picture of that guy is Ben Ali from Tunisia. He also ran away with several $1 billion. The FIFA case that touches this country, there's someone here that has been involved to the wrongdoings of FIFA. The state of Delaware in the United States, where you can go with $300 or $500 and buy an offshore company to hide the money you're stealing from your country. There are several examples of grand corruption we can bring to this discussion. But the thing is that there's a new paradigm regarding corruption. In the near past, when we talked about corruption, 20 years ago, we were talking about abuse of entrusted power for personal gain. This is the classical definition TI put in place some years ago. So we were talking basically about corrupt individuals. If we look at the history of our region, Papa Doc Duvalier in Haiti, Trujillo in Dominican Republic, Somoza in Nicaragua, Collor de Mello in Brazil, have a long list, Menem in Argentina, and so and so. Mainly we were talking about dictatorships or authoritarian regimes and individuals taking money, a lot of money. There was a lot of administrative corruption, extended administrative corruption in most of our countries. So this was the type of corruption we were used to. Now, the paradigm has changed because the environment has changed. We are living in a global world, so boundaries are no more a limit to move money and move from one place to another. We have immense technical means. Now with just a click, you can mobilize assets from one place to another. We are going to hear some speech later on cybercrime, and you will hear things that you will never imagine could exist. This is a fantasy world. But technical means, of course, are also in the capacity of use of the corrupt. So this has significantly changed the environment of corruption. The financial tools. Every day, the financial system is creating different tools that can make very easy move billions of dollars from one place to another. The other reality is that there is a lot more money in the world. There's a lot more money in the market. So that's what we are seeing, why we are seeing the figures of billions of dollars moving to the pockets of the corrupt. Another element that has significantly changed the environment and contributes to a generation of grand corruption is organized crime. Particularly in our region, drug trafficking, and you know this very well because Trinidad and Tobago has been taken as one of the routes to take the drug to the first world. Organized crime now is not a bunch of a mafia family. We are talking about criminal networks with huge, immense amounts of money. If we see only HSBC have moved $800 billion to the drug cartels. They have private armies. If you see what happened in Mexico, the government of Mexico tried to recover control of Michoacan and they were not able because the drug traffickers had private armies that repelled and defeated the Mexican army. So we are talking about powerful networks, not only in drugs, of course, human trafficking, illegal timber, illegal mining. There are many criminal networks and powerful networks around the world. And those networks need to put their money in the market. They need politicians to talk on their behalf, to sit on Congress and rule on their favor. And this is how the illicit money of corruption and organized crime is getting into our parliaments and into our governments. And of course, they have changed their structure. If you think of the classic Italian mafia, there was a family with a territorial area where they operated, specifically in some of their activities they knew very well. Some of them were specialized in drugs, others in extortion, others in gaming. So there were specific activities. Now, and this is something that has been a matter of intense research, organized crime is not anymore a family type of mafia. There are criminal networks, very flexible networks. And the value of these criminal networks is basically on the capacity of delivering the products. One day they can deliver drugs, the other day they can deliver human organs. So all these elements together have contributed to the development of these practices of grand corruption. And one of the consequences of grand corruption is that usually it goes unpunished. And then here we talk about impunity. And impunity is a phenomenon that occurs when people is committing crimes, in this case specifically corruption crimes, and they go away with it. Nothing happens. How many convictions for corruption do we have in this country? That was the first question I did when I arrived to the airport. And someone said, look, before I respond to your question, let me tell you that this airport was done with some significant amount of irregularities. So the first question we have to ask here, are we living in an environment of impunity? And when we talk about impunity, then we have to ask other questions. Why are the corrupt going away with it? Why are they not sitting on the bench and being judged? First of all, lack of independence of the authorities that have to investigate and sanction. Usually, when we look into the phenomena of impunity, and this is a global issue, we found a lot of political interference. Politicians calling the judges, the prosecutors, interfering with the police, not allocating the budget they need to do their work. This, of course, has an impact in a situation where nothing happens to those who have committed these crimes. Of course, there's a lot of fear. In some cases, there is lack of capacity. Prosecutors, policemen, judges that have not been well trained, that do not know how to manage these cases, that are overwhelmed because on the other side they have a corrupt that has a PhD on finance, accountants, lawyers. In some other cases, it's because there could be a violent reaction. Many countries have suffered the killing of judges and prosecutors and policemen. We in Transparency International have some heroes. One of our members was killed in Rwanda because he was investigating police corruption. So there are consequences, of course, for us doing this type of inquiries and denounces. But impunity is something we need to address. If we are serious about confronting corruption, then we need to do something in order to change this environment. We have to generate consequences for those who are involved in corrupt practices. And since I'm Peruvian, I just briefly want to tell you the story of Fujimori and Montesinos. Those who are in that picture. Fujimori, my former president, and Montesinos, his personal advisor, in charge of the National Intelligence Service, and amazingly, in combating drug trafficking in Peru. As you may know, Peru is the #1 producer of cocaine in the world. So drug trafficking activity in my country is very intense. Fujimori was elected in 1990. No one knew who he was, but he expressed the outrage of the people with that typical traditional politicians, and he presented himself as someone new in politics in Peru. And he defeated Vargas Llosa, the most well-known Peruvian, Nobel Prize of Literature. It was called at the time what happened with Fujimori, the tsunami Fujimori, the phenomenon of Fujimori, and his famous phrase for the campaign was integrity, technology, and work. That's what Fujimori offered the Peruvians, and probably that's one of the reasons why he won the elections. When he arrived into power, he brought with him Vladimiro Montesinos, a former military who had been expelled of the armed forces because he was caught selling military reserve information to the Americans when Peru was acquiring all the parts and military elements from Russia. But then he studied law in prison and went out and was the lawyer of Fujimori. And Fujimori took him as his personal advisor to power. I will not go long on the story. Everybody knew Fujimori and Montesinos were taking money from the public budget. They organized a criminal network within the Peruvian government until a video appeared. We had the luck that Montesinos loved to tape everything. So he taped all the bribes he paid. And when we caught him, we found 80 pieces of luggage full of videos. One of those videos leaked before everybody knew about this. And in that video, Montesinos appeared bribing a congressman in order to literally buy his vote, because this was a congressman of the opposition. And that was the end. The people went to the streets. There was a lot of outrage there, and Montesinos flew away. So Fujimori, to save himself and to take distance from Montesinos, said, Montesinos has been stealing money from Peru. Let's go after him. And I will call for early elections because I'm guilty of not being aware of this. And he decided to appoint someone to go after Montesinos. And that was me. 2 weeks after we started our investigations, we found enough evidence that linked Fujimori to Montesinos, and we filed an accusation against the president. 3 days after, he left Peru, saying he was going to a summit on the Pacific Rim, and flew away to Japan, where he was also a national. And then he stayed for many years. Finally, he went in an underground flight to Chile, and there he was captured and extradited to Peru. So this is what we found in the first weeks of our investigation. We started with the hypothesis that what had happened in Peru was the typical corrupt scheme of widespread administrative corruption. But no, when we started collecting information, we found that there was a very well-established network. There were not some bad public officials taking money. There was an organized network with thousands of people in the private sector, in public office, and of course, all of them linked to the political power in those days. So this is the organigram of this pyramid. In the top of the pyramid, we had, of course, the president, Alberto Fujimori, AEF, Vladimiro Montesinos Torres, his personal advisor, and the general commander of the armed forces, Nicolás Hermosa Rios. Those three were on the top of this organization and were covering all the spaces of the Peruvian state. So the pictures you see on the second row are the president of the Electoral Tribunal, who appears in a video receiving $10,000, and the promise that every month he will receive this additional $10,000 in order to block the opposition. The guy next to him was the president of the Supreme Court, who also appears in a video receiving several amounts of money in order to assure that not one accusation against this network will go through the system. The guy in the middle, the president of Congress, Victor Hoy, who also was in charge of recruiting the media and congressmen of the opposition with different payments in order to put them at the service of the criminal network. The bald guy next to him was the one in charge of the laundry. He was in charge of all the financial schemes to take the money out of Peru to Grand Cayman, to Switzerland, to Panama, to Liechtenstein. And the last picture is a general of the armed forces because the armed forces were also co-opted by this organization in order to take control of the drug trafficking business. The zones and the areas, the regions where the coca is produced were under military control, so they were charging bribes to the drug traffickers in order to allow the pass of drugs from one place to another. And also, because usually grand corruption is linked to human rights abuses, a paramilitary group was created within the armed forces in order to kill people of the opposition, what happened certainly in many cases. So this is a typical situation of grand corruption and organized crime. This is the gallery of our famous detainees on the first months of the investigations. We had former ministers, 5 members of parliament, that number increased up to 15 later on, several magistrates and justices of the Supreme Court, including the Chief Justice, the President of the Electoral Tribunal and several magistrates of this court. The Attorney General of our country went to prison, and she was convicted to 10 years when it was proved that she was receiving money from Montesinos in order to grant impunity to the organization. Several mayors of different parts of the country, and probably this is the most impressive number, 14 generals of the armed forces, the police, went into prison in one night. And on the private sector, we also had a chance to investigate and put in prison broadcasters and owners of banks and some other private business that were complicit to Montesinos. The 3 heads of this criminal organization are currently in prison, all of them convicted to 25 years, Fujimori, Montesinos, and Hermosa Rios, and probably they will die there because life will not give them enough time to be released. So this is a typical case of grand corruption in South America. Now the question is, what is happening here in Trinidad and Tobago? And I started giving the example of my country because I don't want to be intrusive. I just want to ask some questions and see if our chapter here is addressing the corrupt phenomenon in the way we, as civil society organization, are willing to do. As Derek mentioned, the position of Trinidad and Tobago is not good. It's under the average, and it's 11 points under 50 that would be the mid position in the table. There has been a decrease on the control of corruption. From what I've read, I've done my homework. I have read a lot about Trinidad and Tobago before coming here. I have consulted with different people of this country, and this is what I found. There has been a decrease of control of corruption and issues linked to drug trafficking. There's still a lot of poverty in this country, even though it's considered a middle-income country. There's still a lot of inequality, and you just can go around and see that. You know that better than me, that I'm a foreigner. And what has really impressed me is the level of impunity. You can measure impunity when you go to a country and ask how many PEPs, political exposed persons, have been indicted and prosecuted. Maybe none, because we have a very clean political class. I don't know if this is the situation here. Probably if I go to Oslo and ask to my chapter in Norway, how many politicians do you have indicted? The answer would be 2 or 3. When we have asked why impunity is a rule, then the response is because the police is not doing their work, because we have too few means, because poverty doesn't allow us to budget the agencies that are in charge of dealing with organized crime and corruption? I don't think so. I've been recently in Honduras, the most violent country in the world. 86.6 killings out of 100,000 citizens. And this is an 8 million country population, and they have 25 assassinations per day, to a point that the OAS has recently created a commission to address this issue. And of course, Honduras has an economical situation that is under the situation of Trinidad and Tobago. But some interesting things are happening in Honduras. When you ask the Attorney General, he can show you a significant number of authorities that are under investigation. There are 2 former ministers that already went to prison because of corruption. So it's not a matter of budget. It's a matter of political will and how we are going to confront this situation if we do not want to lose the country. And that is the point. If we continue in this situation, we are going to lose our countries. Look what's happening in Central America. Guatemala had to open their boundaries to accept United Nations imposing an external commission to fight corruption because the average of impunity in Guatemala was 98%. Not even one case arrived to a conviction 10 years ago. Now the situation has changed totally. But they were losing their country. And impunity is, of course, one of the reasons that could happen. I read the papers. I only have a day and a half. I was reading some papers, and I found that there were some, well, the first one is an international, very well-known case, the FIFA case, and Mr. Warner involved in this situation, accused of at least taking $150 million, bribing and match fixing and paying in order to decide where the World Cup was going to take place. But there are other cases I read on the papers that you know better than me, of course. I'm just pointing out what I read in a day and a half. Calder Hart, $65 million. Mary King, $100,000. And yesterday, the day before yesterday, I found this newspaper. And in 2 pages, I found 2 cases of ministers of this government that are accused, or at least suspicious, of being involved in corrupt practices. And the people is asking. Yesterday, I went to the TV, and before I went to my interview, there was someone there saying, I would like the Prime Minister to explain what happened with Minister McDonald. And then there's this other case of Minister Camille Robinson Regis, who have given 4 different explanations for a movement of money. Of course, we are not convicting anybody. I'm not saying these people are guilty. But the people is expecting responses. The people is expecting reactions. The people wants to know. And if we want to be clean, then we have to take some decisions. And probably the correct decision would be, okay, we will open an inquiry. Please, Minister, come here and explain the situation. And probably they have the correct responses and nothing happens. But what we cannot do is say, this will go to the police and let the police do their work when everybody knows that the police is not doing their work here. So, corruption needs serious and strong responses and stand. There's this very old say that comes from Rome that says that the wife of the Caesar not only needs to be clean, but she needs to appear to be clean. And what people is looking is what is happening regarding corruption and impunity around the world. And some lessons can be taken from these experiences. First of all, in order to address grand corruption and address impunity, we need clean leadership with political will. What we did in Peru, and Peru is not a Nordic country, it's a South American country with a lot of problems, was possible because we had a transitional president that put political will, that decided to confront the situations and not say, let's do as usual and the police will take charge of that. No. He, as a president, was in the first row saying, okay, I want responses, I want results, I want investigations, and he did it. And he gave the money for that. So political will and leadership is essential for any anti-corruption process that we want to develop. Independence of investigators and justice. Of course, if someone is appointed by the same people that are going to be investigated, then we have a problem. We need to assure independence in our judges, in our prosecutors, in our police authorities. We need to break impunity, and this is part of a strategy we are trying to apply around the world. Robert Klitgar, who is one of the former professor of Harvard and one of the most relevant specialists in anti-corruption, says the first thing you need to do in order to fight and address grand corruption and impunity with efficiency is apply the method of FBF, fry a big fish. People need to see that this is serious. We don't want those pickpocketers in prison only. We want those that are taking the money from the top. And if the people doesn't see that there's political will frying big fishes, then we don't have legitimacy to conduct this type of efforts. And there are some other lessons we can share. Probably we need to create some anti-corruption subsystem at the judiciary. We were talking this yesterday with the Chief Justice, and he agreed on this, and it was his proposal. We need to strengthen institutions. One of the indicators, very dangerous indicators, of the feasibility of a country is the level of impunity. And authorities hate to hear that their state could be or is a failed state. I was some years ago in Dominican Republic in an event with the president, and he was absolutely outraged because Foreign Policy, an international magazine, said that Dominican Republic was becoming a failed state because they couldn't control impunity. And this is something serious, because when you become a failed state, then a lot of consequences arise from that. Yesterday, talking to some citizens of this country, I heard twice that Trinidad could be considered a failed state because of the levels of impunity. And this is something serious. It's people of this country thinking that their institutions are not in the capacity to confront this problem, then it could be a dangerous environment for the future. At the end, we need alliances, and as we have been saying to the authorities in this country and all around the world, we are here to support. We are not here to fight. Of course, we will fight if there is no political will. But if we found governments and authorities that are willing to address these issues, you have us as partners. We have a lot of knowledge. We've been collecting best practices around the world, and we are willing to share them with the authorities in order to improve the environment. That's why Transparency International has defined a new strategy. It's a 2020 strategy. It has 3 pillars. One is called People and Partners, just what I'm saying. We are willing to partner with other organizations, with good authorities in order to confront this problem. We are absolutely conscious that a sole organization cannot be efficient confronting this huge issue of grand corruption. We want to work in prevention and enforcement of justice. And we've been working for decades with judges, prosecutors, police, training people, building capacity. But when there is no political will, again, nothing of this is worth. So now, if we don't see political will on the justice system, and if the justice system is not delivering results, that is convictions, that is prison, that is sanctions, then we will promote social sanctioning. We will be naming and shaming. We will be pointing and speaking loud and saying, these people need to be investigated. These people is suspicious of corruption. We want responses. It is not admissible that the corrupt walk away on the streets. Worst even, they are presented to society in the social pages of the magazines and the TVs as models of success, when everybody knows that they made their money stealing money from the rest of the country. This needs to be said, and we are going to be working on that trend if we don't find political will and cooperation from the authorities. And finally, we want a stronger movement, and we are working on our own structure to be more efficient on our work. I will finish saying this. This is our No Impunity initiative. We are centering our work addressing impunity. We have delivered several campaigns and products. We are working, for example, for the establishment of a global registry of beneficial owners of offshore companies. According to the OECD, most of the transnational bribery cases went through offshore companies that can be bought for very few dollars in Panama, Grand Cayman, and other places of the world, BVI, Virgin Islands, and others. Now, 3 countries, the UK, Denmark, and Norway recently, have agreed, and we went to the G20 and we obtained that the G20 accepted that they are going to work on the establishment of a global registry in order to know who is the ultimate beneficiary of these corporate vehicles that usually serve to hide those who are taking money illicitly through corrupt practices. We are working on the definition of grand corruption. We are now working with human rights organizations, and we will use the human rights system to try to take some cases of grand corruption to the human rights system and to the International Criminal Court as a criteria of admissibility for cases against humanity. Because we believe that even though it is not technically feasible to take cases of grand corruption directly to the International Criminal Court, this could be some of the elements that will be considered by the prosecutor and the judges of this court. We are campaigning. We just launched a contest. I will explain in my last point. We are having legal offices in our chapters. Our chapter here in Trinidad has what we call an ALAC, an anti-corruption legal office, in order to take denounces and try to make assessment of critical issues of corruption in the country. So probably in the near future, you will be hearing some of the findings of our ALAC here in Trinidad. I already mentioned social sanctioning. This is the last slide. We launched a contest some months ago. This was a beauty contest in order to choose the worst cases of corruption in the world. It was open in the internet. We invited people to present their cases. We received 385 nominations. We reduced that to a short list of 15, and then we started a voting process. 31 million people went through this web, and we collected thousands of votes. And the results are amazing. First place, Petrobras in Brazil. Second place, Yanukovych in Ukraine. Third place, Ben Ali in Tunisia. Fourth place, Martinelli in Panama. Fifth place, FIFA. And I can continue with the list. You can see it on our web, www.unmaskthecorrupt.org. And you can take part of this because the voting has finished. Now we have opened the third stage of the contest. And this is about social sanctioning and taking several actions that we will be proposing to our public in order to address these issues of corruption. So this is the situation we are confronting nowadays in the world. Grand corruption is a reality. Impunity is a reality. But there's a window of hope. If you observe what is happening in the region, Brazil, a bunch of courageous, professional, tenacious prosecutors, 11 prosecutors taking the Petrobras case, the biggest case in the region for decades. They have conducted Lula, detained to respond to questions he didn't want to respond. And probably Dilma Rousseff is going to get into severe trouble in the near future. Because this was an immense scheme of corruption where the leaders of huge companies of Brazilian construction private sector were bribing and putting money into the highest levels of the government and the party, the ruling party of Brazil. Now, 5 of the CEOs of those companies, something nobody could ever imagine, are in prison. Odebrecht, Camargo Correa, Andrade Gutierrez, the biggest companies doing business all around the region and the world, even Africa. So what is happening in Brazil is a hope for us, saying this is possible. A group of people where there is political will is in the capacity of changing the environment and addressing corruption. Guatemala, the president and the vice president resigned and went to prison because they were caught in a corrupt scheme called La Línea. because now they have a new Attorney General's office, because this international group put in place by United Nations, the CICIG, made their work. And you had thousands of Guatemalan citizens going to the streets claiming for justice, for eradication of corruption. And it happened, and it's happening. Now there are 3 ministers in prison too, and they are indicting very high-level officials of that government. Honduras, one of the weakest countries of the region. Every Saturday at 3 o'clock, thousands of citizens get together in the parks to protest against corruption, demanding the president to take action against corruption. And this had its effect. There are 2 ministers in prison, and now, next week, the new commission of the OAS will start working in order to address corruption with the Attorney General of Honduras. And this is happening here in our region, so it is possible. This is not Norway, this is not Denmark, this is not Sweden. This is the Americas. So what this shows, and I finish with this, is that if there's political will, it can be done. If there is no political will, then we, the citizens, can generate that political will. And that's our invitation to you in order to fight corruption, eradicate impunity, get together and do something for the benefit of our countries and our children that will come. And it's not fair that they receive a world as the one we are living right now. Thank you very much.